Alrighty. Probably should have done this before I hit record, but we're here now and we're doing it. Now my nose itches. Okay. This is Johnny Harris. This was requested, and somebody said check it out. They requested Johnny Harris for me to do a couple videos, but they did not say which one, so I just picked this one because it was one of the new ones. Yep, I'm gonna break this down into 2 videos, and yep, video time now.
In China are fighting a war. It's not a war that you can really see, and it's not a traditional battlefield war with soldiers, at least not yet. This is a war that's being fought in government offices and company boardrooms. It's a war that's being fought with rules and regulations, and it's meant to stop.
Yeah, I should have said something. This is Johnny Harris, U.S. vs. China, the war you can't see, and it was about microchips. So, I should have clarified. My apologies.
Rivals from getting their hands on the most important technology in the world, microchips. You might hear them called semiconductors, microchips, or integrated circuits. These are all the same thing. We're just gonna call them chips, microchips, tiny pieces of metal that are magic and that run our world.
Never heard of them.
This is a big thing that's happening in geopolitics right now. And I want to help you understand the stakes of this new conflict between the US and China. It's going to be the center of global attention for years to come. And what we're seeing right now is how boring trade regulations and business rules can escalate to something that can impact your everyday life, because your life depends on chips, whether you know it or not. In fact, let me show you. Everything has silicon in it. Anything that has any technological smartness to it is a product of silicon.
So people ask if there's a secret to how I slept with over 1,550 girls. And I often joke that I have an unfair advantage.
Yeah, no one believes you.
Sorry, Tom. Oh, and it's not just like the usual suspects techie things. Yep, microchip. My refrigerator, silicon. My microwave, silicon. Nah, I'm just playing with you. This doesn't have silicon in it. This is just a few little things I found around the office, but like, silicon is in your refrigerator, your microwave, like it is in your digital clock. It is what makes our world go round. I mean, we are speaking through silicon right now. Like, you are watching this on the internet that is made possible because of silicon on a screen that is being fired by a silicon chip. Like, everything is silicon in our world. Besides like the forest or something, or like, you know, analog cameras. So microchips make our economy possible, but it's not just tech. It's not just like consumer tech. It's also military. The military needs microchips. They need microchips for weapon systems. They need microchips for intelligence. They need microchips for AI. They need microchips to stay ahead of.
Do they put microchips in missiles and then fire them and those missiles blow up, destroying the microchip? Because if we have a finite amount of microchips, doesn't it defeat the purpose of destroying them? But then, of course, we wouldn't have smart bombs. We'd be back to the stupid bombs, right? Maybe? I don't know.
Their rivals. Microchips represent geopolitical power because they represent military power. That's something to just keep in mind as we go through this story.
House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi is in Taiwan tonight. China is already responding.
Lead the world in future industries, protect our national security.
We're in the middle of one of the most fundamental changes in the character of war in the history of mankind.
Damn.
Hey, pause. I feel really strongly that the internet is a place where you can learn to level up your professional skills. I learned all my skills on the internet. That is how I know how to animate and edit and film and do all of these things. The sponsor of today's video also believes this. Thank you, Scalar, for sponsoring today's video. Scalar is a place where you can go and level up your skills.
Thanks, Scalar.
a program like Scalar that will accelerate you, that will help you get in the right doors, and that will give you the skills that you need to stay on the cutting edge of all of this stuff. I am a giant proponent, like philosophically, of the idea that you can bypass big institutions where education is usually done and...
Okay. Oh, son of a bitch.
In 1959, the US was about to get very lucky. Computers at the time were becoming a thing, but they kind of looked like this. Tons of wires connecting everything, all of them sending little precise electronic signals to each other to solve tedious, complex math problems. It was clunky, it was inefficient, it wasn't very special, yet. But then 2 American engineers that were working separately at 2 totally different companies had a very similar idea. And the idea was to get rid of this, all these wires. There was this new technology that had cropped up called a transistor. It was like a really precise, reliable on and off switch. It allows you to control pulses of electricity super precisely. But at first, transistors looked like this. They were big and clunky, lots of parts. So the idea was, what if we start carving these little on and off switches onto a material called silicon? It's like a super abundant metal-like material inside of Earth's crust. But it's actually a horrible conductor of electricity. If you mix silicon with other elements, it conducts electricity really well. It is a semiconductor of electricity. Exactly what they needed to precisely control the flow of electricity very accurately. No more clunky long wires. Let's just carve our little transistor switches onto this silicon chip, a single circuit. That way we can fit a lot more into one place, all close together. So that's what they did. And then the world changed forever.
With the transistor, man has gone far toward matching some of the capacity of the human brain.
Okay, real quick aside here. We're gonna get to the geopolitics and stuff, but I was so curious about one thing. Why does being able to precisely control the on and off switch, or like the flow of electricity, do anything to change the world? Well, it turns out, this is where my mind bends a little bit. Just stick with me here. So transistors can turn on and off. And they send a signal that results in one of 2 things, a 1 or a 0 when it gets to the other side. Super boring and useless if you just have one little transistor sending a 1 or a 0. But if you have 1,000 of these switches, all sending little signals in the right order, suddenly you have something that kind of resembles a little brain, firing signals in a coordinated system that can actually solve logical mathematical problems and literally remember things. This is kind of how our brain works. It's pulses, lots of pulses. And now we're talking about computing. This is how computers work. The more pulses of electricity you can control, the more you can do with technology. And suddenly, there's a new gold rush in the United States. But the gold is now silicon, and the rush is to put as many of these little switches onto that silicon chip as possible so that we can make our technology do more and more sophisticated stuff. And now people have smarter clocks and TVs and radios and video games and calculators. Things that you can hold in your hand and press a bunch of buttons, and suddenly the silicon chip is solving math problems for you instantaneously. What is happening? This is magic. Oh, and it's not just tech bros in the 60s who are loving this. The US military and NASA are first in line to get their hands on these new chips. They dream of using them for more sophisticated weapons or going to the moon. Chips were becoming a currency for national power. We gotta protect them, thinks the USA. Luckily, the USA didn't really have to do much to protect them at first. They were killing it. They were the global leaders of this chip making stuff. Every year, US companies crammed more and more transistors onto this little piece of silicon. More calculations per second. More and more companies are now cropping up to make dreams come true with their new magical microchips. Lots of this action was happening right here in Central California, in a valley that would soon take on the name of the material that enabled all this magic to happen. By the mid-1980s, they were carving nearly 300,000 little on and off switches onto a piece of silicon. Oh, and look, it's Steve Jobs and Bill Gates.
Yes!
They're using these more sophisticated silicon chips to change the course of history. Home computing, color televisions, more advanced satellites, and smaller electronic devices of all kinds. There's a revolution happening. And over the next 30 years, the number of transistors that they can fit onto a piece of silicon starts to become ridiculous. And it's like the 90s, and these things are getting faster and smaller, and now humans have computers in their homes that are more advanced than the ones that were used to land on the moon.
I remember when, like, the very first family computer we got, I think I was in 5th grade, 6th grade. It I think it had a... It didn't, I mean, it had like 250 megabyte hard drive or something ridiculous, which maybe 500 megabyte. It was so minuscule by today's standards that I'm surprised we were even able to download, because it came with like an encyclopedia on there, which that was the joy. You would just, I think what would they call it? Magna Carta? Is that what it was? You put that in, that was your enjoyment. Oh, I type up cardinal, and then it would show you a picture of a cardinal, and it would tell you all about it, and you'd be like, oh, wow, that's awesome. Redwood, and then it would show you a picture of a redwood and tell you, like, that was the joy. Pre-internet, I clearly wouldn't know. I'm 18, obviously, just like my audience. So, you know, I'm just saying that's what I've heard, my video.
Not only do they play the typical computer games that all the kids enjoy, but their curiosity for learning has skyrocketed.
And look, it's even smaller now. It fits in your pocket.
And we are calling it iPhone.
None of this is possible without these little magical brains made of silicon. Okay, but then a problem arises, and it has to do with these. These look like just factories where they make microchips, right? No, these are not just factories. We have a special name for these. They're called fabs, and they are a central part of this story. Because listen, cramming tens of millions of
Anyone ever heard the term fabs before? It's new to me.
Transistors onto a piece of metal-like substance from the Earth is hard to begin with. But as the number of transistors continues to double and double and double, making them becomes incredibly complicated. I mean, look at these operations. This is inside of a fab, and the reason why it looks like they're doing open heart surgery here is because even a single speck of dust that gets into this fab and onto one of these chips can totally ruin it. So yeah, it was American companies who are designing and making chips, but every year they have to spend more and more on these tedious fabs, these factories on steroids. They're getting really spendy, like billions of dollars spendy. Meanwhile, an ocean away, you've got a couple of economic miracles happening in all of these countries in East Asia that are rapidly developing. And they want in on this microchip gold rush.
Easy Wheels started as my college project, and we now sell our wheel covers all around the world.
One of these countries is Japan, where a bunch of new tech companies were getting really good at making chips, and they could make them and sell them for way cheaper than the US. Oh, and by the way, this was with the help of the Japanese government, who's like subsidizing this. Governments love microchips. That's going to be a theme in this video. So the US is hating this. They're kind of freaking out that Japan is getting in on all the chip gold rush. They got to do something about it. So it's 1987, and the US government basically says, no more Japanese chips. They put a 100% tax on Japanese chips coming into the US, which, not surprisingly, just crushes Japan's chip industry. Too bad, so sad, Japan, said the president at the time, who was, wait, Reagan. What the hell, Ronald Reagan? The prophet of free markets and free trade? What's going on here?
Our aim is to increase our national wealth so all will have more.
Well, turns out that chips are really important. So important, in fact, that Mr. Free Market Economics abandoned his principles to protect American chips. This is a theme. We're gonna see a lot more of it. Okay, so let's move on.
I don't think he's the first president that would ever have done that in the face of national interest. Instead of paying for cheaper chips, why don't we make them, have the people pay a little bit more? Well, more, could be substantially more, but it's, you know, that made in the USA stamp kind of thing that I'm always told, if I see that, I should take pride in it, and I should purchase that. But it comes down to the money. Some stuff, sure. Some stuff I'm just like, maybe I'll get that and tell everyone I got the other.
Meanwhile, another Asian economic miracle country is growing super fast and wants to get in on this. But they also are looking over at Japan and they're like, we don't want the US to squash us for trying to compete with them. So if we can't beat them, let's join them.
I'm sorry, were the chips that were being made in America only being used in America? So we were kind of making our own, and you could say Japan screwed up by making them cheaper and then sending them to us. So I'm going to guess that Taiwan makes them and sells to other countries to not upset the US's footprint in this market. That's my only guess, because I know today they still make them. They make the best quality, actually. I don't think we make them anymore. Damn it, I'll have to watch the rest of the video.
Oh, and this is a really important foreshadow here. Taiwan is looking over here at their neighbor China, who's also getting really rich and more serious about making good on their lifelong promise to eventually invade Taiwan and, quote, reunite it with China. Kind of scary. So in the back of Taiwan's mind, they're also kind of looking for a way to get the West to protect them. So they made a bet. A freaking brilliant bet that solved all their problems at once. At the time, a bunch of engineers in Taiwan were actually leaving Taiwan to go to the US, to go to university there, and then to actually work for US companies in the cutting-edge microchip economy. Texas Instruments, Intel. So the first thing the Taiwanese government does is lure them back. They guarantee them jobs, they pay for their travel costs, they give them tax breaks to create companies. Their goal is to create a Silicon Valley in Taiwan, and it totally works. It's like a reverse brain drain. Thousands of engineers return to Taiwan to start companies and to help build the microchip industry in Taiwan. And one of those engineers is the one who actually changed the game. It's this guy named Morris Chang. He had the best idea of all of them. He had seen that American chip makers were hating how much money they had to invest in these fabs, these really complicated factories to make microchips. His idea was, instead of trying to compete with the United States in the chip industry and get crushed like Japan did, let's become their friend. Let's solve their problem. We won't design chips, we won't make devices, we won't make the software, we will just make the chips themselves. We will become...
So I was completely wrong. I am dumb.
The masters of fabs, the tedious, expensive job of getting more and more transistors onto a piece of silicon. So he starts a company called Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. Super promising and creative name, Morris. And the government of Taiwan is super into it, because now they can get in on the chip gold rush, and instead of pissing off the United States, they actually will solve the US's problem. And, crucially, make the US reliant on them. So now they have protection, a silicon shield to protect them from their big aggressive neighbor. The government gave nearly half of the startup costs to Morris Chang to start this new venture. They connected him to venture capital, and according to Chang himself, the Prime Minister of Taiwan even called a super rich Taiwanese investor to force him to invest in TSMC. Whoa. Okay, yeah, wow. Like, you can see just how vital chips are. A little piece of silicon with a bunch of on and off switches. TSMC was basically a state-owned company from the beginning. So yeah, Taiwan's now in the game, and semiconductors are now becoming a geopolitical bargaining chip. A geopolitical
I see what you did there.
I kind of regret it. Sorry.
It's just...
Oh, enough of these fat dogs. I don't care. Shut up. Go away. I don't care. Don't process it.
Go in here, and I'm tied.
I believe I'm going to be the nominee.
So it's like the early 2000s, and semiconductors are now squarely a part of geopolitics. But meanwhile, in business world, in Silicon Valley, they are loving this Taiwan situation. Because now, instead of having to do all of this expensive, tedious fab stuff, they can just do the design and the software and the business side of it, and they can just ship it off to TSMC, and they do the rest, taking on the expensive, tedious work of maintaining their fabs and keeping them up to the cutting edge, which requires billions of dollars every year. Like, to keep some perspective, look at this graph. This is the number of transistors on a piece of silicon. By 2010, they're now getting 1 billion transistors onto a piece of silicon the size of your fingernail.
What?
And the only way to do that is to make each one of these insanely small. So let's just take a moment to blow our own minds here. Each transistor is becoming smaller than a width of a human hair. Wait, no, sorry, that's actually way too big of a scale. A human hair is like 90,000 nanometers thick. We need to go smaller, like a red blood cell. Wait, no, that's still too big. 7,000 nanometers. Okay, a virus, something that's not even totally alive. It's so small. Wait, that's 14 nanometers. Still too big. I mean, we are getting into insane scales here. IBM recently revealed a chip with transistors that are 2 nanometers thick, making them literally smaller than a strand of DNA. So in these fabs, the reason it looks like this is because they have to figure out how to do this and to keep doing it and keep making it smaller and smaller, providing the world with the most advanced chips.
Is there a dimension that they're given for the size of a chip, and then from there they have to, like, okay, this is terrible scale. Right. We'll make it easier. A soda can, right? Soda can. That's the size of the chip. Now on that you have to fit 3 billion of the on-off switch semiconductors. Oh, was that the name of... You know what I'm saying. I got going. Oh, woo! And it came out of nowhere. Are they given a dimension size and then the amount of chips that they need, and then they send it off to Taiwan and say, I don't know, figure it out, dummy? And they do, and they send it back and they're like, we figured it out, shitheads. And America's just like, all right, you got us. That's, how is that, that's not possible. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. You might as well have just told me you saw Bigfoot riding on the back of a dragon, because I don't believe it. That is, sorry, utterly ridiculous. It's impossible.
And this is why we have nice things. Your entire world revolves around what is happening on these little strips of silicon. More and more US chip companies don't actually have fabs. They design them, they do all the software and the machinery and the selling and the business, but the actual making of the chip happen in Taiwan. But as
okay, I'm gonna end it here. I'm gonna go back a little bit before this graph. I'm gonna do it now so we're all on the same page. Take it back to right, yeah. Take it back, yeah. You take it back. You take it back right now, you little whore. Yeah, you like that, don't you? Yeah, you do. Where you go? God damn it! What is this stupid? Right there. Don't mind the talking. I was talking to myself. So I'm gonna end it here. Because I don't believe it's true. This is propaganda by the microchip industry or the potato chip industry. It's a chip industry. I am going to end this here because I want to go sneeze. Yeah, what's wrong with me? All right, like and subscribe. And next time you're going to go to work, you're going to put your socks on. Just put a lot of baby oil right in those socks and then put your socks on, slip in your shoes. Oh, it's wonderful.